Good afternoon and welcome to a special workshop meeting for the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is April 11th. It is 2 p.m. And I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time. Begin with introductions around the table. Welcome everybody that's here and viewing us. And I am Mayor Bob Severance. Go ahead.
Erica Wassinger, City Council.
Joe Stowell, City Engineer, and I have representatives from Hoffman and KBA in the audience as well,
Great.
and our project engineer, in case I need some muscle.
Patricia Slow, Finance Director.
Tara Heisen, City Council.
Joel Servadius, City Council.
Jim Wiesner, City Council. Rick Holmberg, City Council.
Thank you, and I guess let the record show that our Mayor Pro Tem is not here, and neither is Councilor Larson. So our agenda today has one item, and we're ahead of schedule already. I'm happy about that, but I think we're going to need most of the rest of the next couple hours to hear from our staff here regarding the clean water facility and the GMP number 13 staff presentation. I'll turn it over to our city engineer, and you get the honor of making the presentation.
Mayor, council members, thanks for having me here this afternoon. Taking time out of your day to talk about GMP number 13. I've tried my best to explain a complicated setup, so bear with me. I've tried there's a number of slides, but I've tried to explain things in some cases one of two different ways, because it is kind of a layer cake the way it's all put together. So the presentation is not advancing. There we go. Technology isn't it great? So I'm going to go over a few things. The basic agenda is I'm going to go over the purpose. Why are we here today talking about GMP 13? An overview of what it is, how that relates to Windjammer Park improvements, how we develop the funding and procurement strategy, GMP 13 cost, and what that impact is to the clean water facility as a whole, and then kind of some frequently asked questions that we've had internally that might help answer some questions kind of preemptively. So the purpose of being here is really to update council and the public on the development of GMP 13. Wanted to discuss the overlap between the clean water facility and the park improvements. I tried to come up with a graphic or a way of phrasing it. I'll just use my arms instead. We have if you look at just physical construction, we have park improvements are this much, and the clean water facility is this much of this GMP. But how it's funded is about it's different than the actual construction, because the clean water facility is responsible for setting the foundation for the park improvements because of impacts to the park through construction and mitigation for those impacts for access and other things. So we'll kind of bounce around a little bit, but keep that in mind when I'm going through the presentation. The clean water facility is kind of one topic, both construction and funding. And Windjammer Park is a separate conversation, both construction and funding. So if I haven't already confused you, I'll move on to the next part. But so an overview of GMP 13. It's as I was saying, it's broken into two really basic elements. We have the clean water facility improvements, the things we have to do to complete the treatment plant and fulfill our obligations as far as permitting goes, and obligations to the public. So as I said before, that's mitigation and restoration of the park and area around the clean water facility. There's some fencing that's that encloses the clean water facility that's part of this GMP, as well as some gates and not only for vehicles but for personnel to get in and out of the clean water facility yard. There's paving inside the yard itself as well, and that's separate from City Beach Street. And then there's demolition of the Whidbey Island Bank building is also in there is part of the clean water facility. And then Windjammer Park improvements is basically, if you want to look at it in the most simplest sense, is it's the implementation of the first phase of the Windjammer Park integration plan. We've modified it a little bit, and I'll have a slide here to kind of demonstrate it in a minute. But so there's really the two categories that we're working with. So as we move into the next phase of work on the construction project, there's the must-haves, the things that we need to do to clean up after ourselves. This is a graphic I've shown before. I haven't changed it. You have the work immediately around the clean water facility, and then we have that large pile of dirt out there, of soil out there that we need to distribute around the site. And that's a requirement to keep it on site as part of our memorandum of agreement with the tribes, state, and feds. But it also is less expensive than trucking it off site. So then the next part is mitigation for impacts to use of the park. And this is also funded by the Clean Water Facility. So it's moving parking around, it's replacing the pathway, moving the basketball court and restroom, and the kitchen facility on the east side. And then we move into, this is the general fund portion of the project, which would be the splash park, remainder of the hardscape around the splash park and the landscaping associated with it, extension of that crescent parking lot around the west side, down to a parking area along the waterfront. And that also includes a kitchen on the west side and maintenance facility on the west side there, and a pavilion that's kind of in the center of where you would drive in from Beeksma. So, I'm going to take a kind of a step back, and I'll, forgive me, some of these slides may be repetitive from other presentations, but I think it's important to reiterate how we got here. When we started working on the idea of the park integration plan, we formed a group of individuals that represented a broad section of our community. Some of them were neighbors, some were leaders in different organizations. The idea is to pull together the basis for what we wanted for a park, and we did a really good job, and that was approved by City Council as we move forward. What we heard is that there's some given elements, and you got to have restrooms. It's got to have your replace the kitchens, or at least maintain that we have kitchens. There's an element of parking, playgrounds, waterfront trail. Clearly it's a park, so family friendly was something that rose to the top. As we were working with the group, we did have a lot of discussion about the RV park, and that topic does come up again and again, which is okay. I understand the concern, but after some deliberation in the group, we found that it wasn't an efficient use of our waterfront park, and maybe another location could be found, or maybe we could do something else with that space that it takes. And trying to develop a modern RV park in that location, it just wouldn't be an efficient use of that space. It'd take up too much land. It's a waterfront park, so waterfront views are important. And the ball fields were another good discussion we had. We decided to include them in the plan, but fully understanding that we can't really implement that part of the plan until the ballpark's removed someplace else. So that's kind of the foundation for the park integration plan. So we said, hey, let's get started on phase one. So the plan itself was broken out into 5 phases. There's 1A and 1B, but it's 5 phases. And so the original one that we were tackling was phase 1, as shown on the screen there. And we thought that is a really interesting place to stop work. Doesn't feel like I personally had a concern if we stopped there and didn't come back to the project for quite some time, that it would seem unfinished. And so we said, well, what if we expand it around the corner here and include this parts of phase 2 and 3, so we complete that parking area. There's a area to turn around, the other kitchen, the other basketball court. You know, make it a really full first phase that if for some reason it takes us 5 years to get funding to do the next one, we can feel good about what we've left. So that was kind of the purpose behind that, and we presented that to council in November of 2016, and we amended Corollo's contract to include that expanded scope. The area in blue that's actually the graphic presented in November of 16. Since that time, you see it, the other graphic that I showed earlier shows it encroaching more on the lagoon area, and that's strictly just to feather that soil that we have on site into the park, so there isn't an abrupt edge or it feels contiguous. So we went out to the public a couple different times with this. We had the first open house was done before we got started, really in the heaviest part of design. We had a lot of community feedback. That feedback was very much like we got the first time. I won't read through all this, but it really focused down a little bit further than the previous comments. Got into natural, simplistic, nature play, flexible and multi-purpose. All of it really seems pretty obvious when you're thinking about a park. So we had a second open house, and this was at 30%, and this was kind of the line between, okay, we've gone from pretty picture and fat pencil to CAD drawings and actually moving into design. And we had a lot of feedback. We had another online open house, and I think that our design team did a really good job of incorporating all the elements we heard from the public. And you can see, like, we heard wanted the splash park to have like a shipwreck, and so they found a way to include a shipwreck in there that has, a bucket that dumps and design it in a way that's durable for a waterfront community like ours. We did also hear at that open house we had, there was a large contingent from the pickleball community that showed up, and so what we've done is we've at least made it possible to use the basketball courts for pickleball as well. So if they choose to use it, it's there for them. If not, it's actually it's a larger park court there for people to use. So moving into now imagine yourself, we have 100% design and we're trying to figure out how to procure all this and fund it. And we've come to you before and said that we have funding in the clean water facility that we knew we had a responsibility for. The general fund, we knew we had a dollar amount, but it didn't quite match what our ambitions were. So how do we go about procuring that with that kind of interesting scenario? Since both the sewer and general funds are going to be used, how do we first question is how do we distinguish in the bid sets, design drawings and everything else, what is paid for by the sewer fund and what's paid for by other funds? It was a challenge. I mean, it's really hard to split this thing apart because the restoration of the site is moving that soil around, and it just so happens that the park improvements, which are would be paid for by the general fund, sit on top of it. So how do you package that and make it sensible that you can track it all the way through the project and explain it to a bidder so that they can bid on it? So what we did is we broke it out into 7 bid packages, and the base bid, which could probably pass if there's anybody interested in the audience that wants those. It's out there, but we've all seen this. This came out. I gave everybody a handout of this. If you don't have one, I can send you another one. But that's what the sewer fund is. That's the base bid. So when you're doing public works bidding, you got to have a basis of bids so that you can compare bidders equally. So when you say you are the lowest bidder, it's based on the bidding on the exact same thing. And then, so the base bid, the sewer fund is listed in that table, is the is the base bid for award of the different bid packages. We further broke that out, so we get,
Just interrupt, this handout does have a front and a back on the front page, so.
yeah, don't slow down, there's
I
more.
went right to page 3 when I first looked at it, so I just thought I'd point that out.
No, that's good, thank you.
Mhm.
I often wonder sometimes if double-sided or single-sided is better, but anyway, this is just one of those. I'm an engineer, I get dwell on these things. So what we did is we put all, the base bid is all the things that we knew we had to do. And that's all sewer fund. And the alternates fall under the general fund, and those were things that are optional. And so that's why the spreadsheet's broken out like it is. And we'll get into that a touch more in just a few. But just so you understand why we broke it out the way we did, that's why. So as we move on to the cost for GMP 13, really this slide up here is just a summary of what you have in front of you. I thought it was important to memorialize that in the presentation so that if we come back to this 5 years from now and wonder what the heck we used as a basis for this conversation, that is just a rolled up summary of what you have in front of you. So what you can see is that the sewer fund, it would be responsible for $12.5 million worth of work. And if we chose to do everything that's in the alternates, it would be an additional $6 million for a total of $18.5 million. So I know that is a bit more than what we were talking about before. The last meeting we had, we thought it was going to be 10 to 15 million, and it did exceed that. You know, 10 was kind of on the low side, 15 was kind of on the high side. I want you to keep in mind when you're looking at this that there are some other numbers included in here that are just related to completing the project. For example, when we were talking 10 to 15 million, we were talking about just the park improvements, but we've added in there paving work, some fencing around the clean water facility, some gates, and all that right there is a couple $100,000. Demolition of the Whidbey Island Bank, that's about $500,000. You have some that we had to. There was an allowance in GMP 10 for earthwork that we had to amend, and that's about $850,000. So I guess what I'm saying is that when you start deducting out the things that aren't really park related, and they're more things that we were addressing with the clean water facility function itself, it's not, I mean, it's still higher than what we'd hoped, but it's not as far out of line. The other thing that's interesting before I move on this is that you'll see that early on when we were talking about the project, we were talking like $5 million for clean water facility and $5 million for general fund. When we were going through the cost estimates, that seemed to balance out. And an interesting byproduct of using just the clean water facility items as the base bid is the contractors were, because they knew they would get awarded that and might not get awarded the other, they put overhead and fee mobilization, all that stuff got rolled into the base bid, and so you can see that it's weighted more in that direction. And it actually turned out a little bit to our favor by doing that, because it leaves us in a better position in funding general fund items. So what have we been doing since we opened bids? We've been looking at ways to shave cost. We've sat down almost immediately after opening bids, and we're looking at all kinds of creative ways. What can we do to bring this cost down? And to be honest with you, we're talking hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars. So what are things we can do? We could defer the maintenance building for Hank to a future phase. And I know that's, sorry, Hank. We know that would make life a lot easier for you, but that was one of the ones that came up. The topsoil that we had shown in the plans in the park was 12 inches. We can reduce that down to 6, if not 3. There's some manholes in the yard itself inside the fence line of the clean water facility that are key manholes. Everything flows through those manholes, and the belt and suspenders approach would be to line those with the lining, and that would have been $50-some thousand. We feel that we can maintain them without having to do that liner, and that's another way we can save a little bit of cost. Oh, I forgot to mention just reducing the topsoil depth cut about $200,000 out. We thought, believe it or not, with that big pile of dirt out there, we thought we were going to have to bring some material in to balance the site. Surprisingly enough, we're going to make it work without having to do that. And the other thing is to go through and select what elective items we have in here that we can postpone to a future phase. I don't want to say eliminate, although that's what comes to mind, but remember, this is phase 1 of what I hope to be multiple phases of a park project. Now here's where things get tricky. As we're working with Hoffman to develop this GMP, some of these items have been publicly bid. And like I was saying before, we can't go and change the bid because that's unfair to other bidders, right? So, like with the topsoil, the way we would realize that savings is after we award, we would do a deductive change order. So when we bring that to council, keep that in mind. It's, we're working in the background still to try and bring that cost down, but it's in order to honor the bid that we received, we have to award it as presented. And then we can go and work backwards and do deductive change orders. There's some others that I know right out of the gate that we can pull out of this before we come to you on Thursday. But once again, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions. It's funny to say that. Anyway, so what kind of impact does this have on the clean water facility? The next slide is on financials, and I think Patricia's probably better to talk to what she put together these slides, and I'll hand it over to her for a few. And
So this is the clean water facility financials that would have gotten in your April 17th packet when it comes out. It's been updated through March 31st. We haven't adjusted anything here. At the end of March, if you look at the very bottom line, we show there's an estimated cash remaining of $1,425,303. So then when you look at the changes that are proposed for clean water facility, if you take that $1,425,303, we're looking at increasing the use of system development funds. We were only going to be using $4 million. We've upped that by $1 million to $5 million, or would. And GMP 13, the difference between what's been budgeted and what we need to find is the $12,415,947 less the $5.3 million that's in the current budget. So that is a difference of $7,115,947. So we needed to locate $4,690,644.
so before you move on to the next slide, this is one of those times where it can get confusing. We're talking about funding for the clean water facility, not
Yeah,
general fund.
just clean water facility.
We'll be talking about the other in a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then how do we pay for the increase? Sewer fund cash reserves. So if we pull the $4,690,644 out of the sewer fund cash reserves, it will bring our approximate fund balance down from 11.9 to 6.4 million. And in that fund, there is also a reserve that's not budgeted of about 1.2 million, because we always pull out 25% of expenses when we're setting budgets that we don't budget. So there's $1.2 million sitting there that we're not touching, and we really don't plan to, because that's 25% that's required by our financial policy. If you go to the next slide, we start talking about general fund. So I've heard the question, what have we identified for general fund? This will walk you through that. So if you look at 2017, when we initially set our budget, we had $382,235 sitting in program income in Fund 325, or the Windjammer Park Fund. We added in $915,574 of sales tax money, so we brought the funding up to $1,297,000. Then in 18, the 1,500 above is our estimated interest. We're gonna move another $177,633 over there from sales tax. We plan to move $212,731 from community parks, $63,985 from park impact fees, $87,500 from both REIT 1 and REIT 2, and then we received from the legislature a grant for $727,500 that just came through that we can use for the park improvements. And what we propose to move, once we have a settled decision from council, we propose to move another $312,042 out of community park, park impact, and REIT. We went and did some digging and found out that we can move up to that amount for the park per code. So we have now identified $2,968,200. We have expenses that we've budgeted for design that have had spending on them, indirect cost allocations, and permits, some of those other things, at a total of $916,662. So what we show as cash available is $2,051,538. If we fully budgeted the general fund portion off of this sheet, the $6,026,378, we would need to find an additional $3,974,840.
So we do have a plan, not to leave you in despair, but we do have some ideas here. So, go ahead.
Just for clarification, everything you've covered so far is base plus the bid alternates. That's the whole package when you say clean water facility plus Windjammer Park. We're looking at the whole full meal deal.
I'm glad you asked. So you go back to, this is clean water facility. And then this is general fund. So, and we'll get into more about how I should have arranged these slides a little differently now that I think about it.
So when you say clean water facility, is that
Sewer fund,
sewer fund?
correct?
Windjammer is general fund,
Yes,
or bid alternate is what we're calling it somewhere else.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about the nomenclature. We're trying to,
Okay.
this was a lot to pull together. That's all right. I should have done better explaining it. So this is the 11 by 17 that's in front of you, and this is our optional items that we have. And you'll probably note right at the top that the final amount that's shown, the 5.4, doesn't match the 6 million that's in the general fund line item in the spreadsheet. This 11 by 17 handout doesn't include negotiated support services, GSPs. There's some things that's why there's a difference, is there's some things that aren't in there that were hard to capture in a short amount of time. So what we have is somewhat of I thought we were going to be able to come in here, honestly, and I thought we were going to be able to come in here and say, let's pick this, I want that, let's do this, and you guys would have a menu to discuss about items that we wanted to include from the general fund. The more we got to looking at it, the more it appeared to be a logical order to how we would implement them. It makes sense. You know, if you're gonna do the hardscape, it's kind of hard to do the hardscape. And hardscape is concrete, asphalt, any retaining walls, things like that, plaza areas. It's hard to do that promenade down to the waterfront alongside the splash park without having the splash park there. So if I might be so bold, the one kind of given that we should chase down is completing the splash park and the hardscape landscaping and electrical that's required for the area in red that's shown on there, along with that, the splash park area in blue. So that's a lot to tackle. I think we figured out a way that we can do that much. So that would give us a really good start on things. The next two on the list would be the pavilion structure, which is the bigger gray square on there. Now the pavilion has a plaza area on one side that you could perform to, or you can flip around to the other side and perform out towards the park. So that's a standalone structure. We can get it all ready to go, and then that could be done at a later time. The west kitchen structure, that's the larger of the two kitchens we were proposing. It has two facilities that are rentable out of that. That's another one that's kind of standalone. Makes sense, you could do that. And actually on those two right there, we've applied for economic development grant funding. It's been turned in to the county. So if any of you are good friends with our county commissioners, it'd be a great time to give them a call. Because I think that right now is about the only way we're going to be able to get those two facilities constructed, along with what we're doing now.
Which two? I was actually writing down
The pavilion.
LTAC questions. The pavilion.
Great, yeah, the pavilion and the west kitchen.
Perfect, thank you.
And so we did submit an application for those along with another, but I think there's a total of 6 that have been submitted, so there's a chance. It's worth asking. And it would make that portion of the park much nicer. So and then this is where we get back to Hank's maintenance facility that I think at this point we don't feel like we're going to be able to chase down funding for that one. That just falls too far off the edge of what we have available to us. So I've repeated that again in a table so that if you want to look at it in tabular form a little bit later and go back to it. And they're largely in order of the way we would choose to implement them if staff had their choice. That's the end of that one, isn't it? So back to you.
Yep. So the question comes up, stability fund. We just closed, we're in the process of finalizing the close of the year, and the stability fund is now at $3,800,699. If that was something council was interested in, they could make an argument for extingent circumstances. That's part of the code. It says that the council can make a written finding that emergency or extingent circumstances exist that require use of city general fund reserves and the general fund revenue stabilization fund. And you'd have to list why it's extingent, unusual, one-time expenses, demands quick action. One of the things about this is economy of scale. If we put that off, will costs increase? It's something that we potentially could argue. A resolution would need to be written outlining the reasons: immediate need, keeping costs down, for capital, not ongoing expense. It also, what we'd be needing to do the things that Joe was talking about would still allow the fund balance to be above $3 million, which was the minimum that we set in the code. So that's an option, and it would require 4 council members to approve. So. Some of the questions to consider is how much should be left in there for emergency? Are there any other council priorities that the stability fund might be used for? Again, council decision. And how to use it, which I described that.
So just to, before we move on to the next slide, just to clarify, that's to get us through the splash park.
Hardscape in the splash park.
Yep,
correct?
hardscape in the splash park. And want to just make sure I bring it up. The bids that we got for the west kitchen and the pavilion, if the grant doesn't come through and this gets postponed, that's just to be clear, that's not the price it'll be the next time we put it out to bid. Because we'll have to modify our plans and it'll be bid separately, and right now we do have an economy of scale. I just don't want the expectation to be that, well, okay, if we get, 2 million, then we can do the other two. Well, it may not be 2 million, it may be something else.
Do you want me to discuss rates or you discuss rates?
I can do it.
Could I,
Yeah.
could I ask one question at this point? When you talked about the stability fund, the current balance, and you talked about adding the 2017 amount,
Yes,
will take it up to $3,800,699.
yes, it will.
The suggestion you just made will bring it down, back down to what? How much do you intend to
Depending,
suggest using?
well, the numbers I was looking at were pre-NSS, right? So these don't include the NSS or sales tax, or do they?
It was, if I remember right from doing some math earlier, wasn't it 500,000 to 600,000 is what we would need out of the stability fund?
I just want to make sure, is NSS in there or not? Or would we have
No.
to add that in?
Yeah, I would have,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can answer that on the fly.
So
So-
probably six to 700,000 potentially. I don't know that for
So
sure.
there will still be roughly 3,150,000
Yes,
or 3,200,000 in that stability fund.
yes.
Okay.
Wanted to add one other thing. When we got started, when that stability fund got started, I think it was 2012. And I think we have been putting money in a stability fund since 2012. And I think the suggestion is that should we decide to use roughly $600,000 of that money, that we wouldn't be expected in the next year to rebuild it to 25%. That is,
Well, based on the way code is written, that is what would have to happen. It would be, what we look at is the total revenues for the year, and you times it by 25%, and it's either that amount or 3,000, whichever is
3 million.
greater. 3 million, it's hard to say. 3 million, whichever is greater.
so isn't the suggestion more along the line of using this one time, at least at this point in time, and amending the code
That would be wonderful.
so that we would keep in excess of 3 million, if that's what the council wants to continue doing. But it wouldn't be expected to be all replenished up to 25% in 2020.
18.
2018.
Yeah, this year. If we use it this year and we drop it down in our revenues,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which,
But it would
as
be
they-
in 2019, is when we would be replenishing the fund. At the close of 2019.
At the close of
or
20
2018.
Yes.
Which is usually about this time in 2019.
right,
Okay.
yeah.
I probably confused everybody.
Yeah, so what it does is it's kind of a, if we use it, then if we replace it fully, essentially we're using our general fund balance, which creates general fund money tightening even further than what we anticipate. If we could amend it, which I'd like to come back to council if possible with a suggested amendment, then we could have a set amount that we want to keep in there, but not the requirement that it's the greater than. We look at it in a way that is feasibly possible if we're wanting to do projects or not take all of the funds out of general fund and move it over to the stability fund. Because that would have impacts on expenses and other things if we did that.
Okay. So the next question is so now we've seen an increase in cost to the project from total project cost of 140 million that we discussed on March 5th to now we're looking closer to 147 million. And we talked to Sean Korn with HDR to do a rate check-in. This is the same slide that I showed on the 5th of March. We revisited and we've worked with Sean to revise the rate analysis. And in the year 2021, we're looking at a little over $2 increase in monthly rate due to the cost.
And 2020.
and 2020. That's, yeah, there's a little bit of an increase in 2020 and then another $1 in 2021. Mind you, we already have adopted the rates through 2019, so they wouldn't change until 2020. So, and that was, working through. You have some slides on this to talk about, don't you?
Mhm.
All right. Have at it.
Okay. So we took, we previously planned when we did the rate study to utilize the fund balance to keep the rates stable, not have a huge increase in rates. Instead of keeping the fund balance really high, we were going to utilize the rate, the fund balance for stabilization, which meant that there was a planned decrease over time, but the fund balance was going to allow for that. Expenditures were planned to exceed rate revenue, and to use the fund balance, the rates would be wouldn't be artificially increased until the fund balance was brought down. The use of the fund balance to cover GMP 13 bid amounts would create a need for the rates to be adjusted starting in 2020. Things to keep in mind. This is a check-in. So when the project's complete, we will use actual cost to determine. Currently, we're using projected costs. We're using what we anticipate the total to be. We're going with the highest possible cost, the GMP maximum. It could come in less, we don't know that. We're not going to be changing the rate structure until the clean water facility project's completed. That's already built into the ordinance through 2019. The estimated operating and maintenance budget is a conservative projection because the plant isn't operating, so they really don't know truly what it's going to cost to run it. They've looked at it, they've got some really good ideas, but that might be a little high. We don't know, or it might be a little low. That's part of the first year of operations. If there's a growth in the customer base, then it could offset the need for a rate increase. We'd have a larger customer base paying in rates, so then that could offset some of that. Debt service is required to be 1.25% for debt coverage, and we have that estimated covered through 2020. Sean's going to be here on April 5th to go over all of the utility rates and talk through his study, so more detailed questions he will be able to provide answers to. He also responds to emails, so if staff have things that I can't answer, I'd be happy to forward it on to him, council.
You said April 5th. I don't think that's possible.
May 1st.
May 1st, I said.
May 1st?
Did I say April 5th?
Yeah, and it was, you said 1.25% too, but it's 1.25 times.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, Patricia.
Could you,
Thanks for correcting me.
could
That's
you
okay.
say one more time that we're going with the highest cost?
I'm saying the GMP maximum. So whatever the contract signed for, there could be savings in that. And that's something that I know Joe could probably talk more about.
You know, we, as you've seen in most every one of the GMPs, there's contingencies and negotiated support services. We like to hold on to those real tight because it's important to have that available if something comes up unexpected towards the end of a project. However, if any of that goes unused, that gets returned back to the city. Does that help? So some frequently asked questions that where am I at? What do we do? What happens if we delay GMP 13? This was a real concern of ours. We're getting real close to the end, and say what you've looked at and you have laid out in front of you is incredibly uncomfortable, and we decided to talk about it some more at another meeting and further out. What kind of an impact does that have on the project and to the city? Well, as soon as we're reaching the critical path on the project, if we were to postpone GMP 13, that has elements like being able to construct the water line across the park to have fire flow to the building and so we can get our C of O. We wouldn't be able to tear down the Woodvale and Bank building, which is where the water line loops through. We wouldn't be able to pave the interior yard of the treatment plant or finish City Beach Street, so we would have access to the site to finish it. With all that, what happens is that pushes the entire schedule over. And ultimately, it could split how we have to construct the clean water facility required elements. So, and then one of the other potential issues we could have is the bids are only good for 45 days. We're already right at that threshold for the bids we received. If the bidders desired, they could rescind their bid, and we might have to go back out to bid again. Material costs could change as we wait. We've all heard about the tariff wars that are going on or starting. That affects materials that we have for our project. And then as we move the schedule over to the right more, that requires some of our subcontractors to stick around longer that they haven't budgeted for and would likely ask for a change order. And as this all gets pushed over to the right, some of the work that we would have hopefully finished by the end of the year would now have to be completed in spring of 2019, which would be another mobilization and demo cost with contractors. It's doable. If that's something that we feel that we need to have a discussion about, it is something that we can do. I strongly recommend we don't, but that's the consequence if we were to postpone award, and that's why we're having a special workshop today and have this on the agenda for the 17th. So some discussion items. We're going to proceed with the value engineering efforts. It's something we've done all along. I know I can look over at Brett and the team from Hoffman and know that we have spent a lot of effort on trying to find cost savings as we've gone through the whole project. We're going to continue to look for additional funding sources. Might be that some of those elements that are optional get pushed out into a future phase. Well, let's start looking for funding for those now. Let's not let the momentum slow us down. Let's keep going. And maybe somebody has another inventive idea on how to fund some of those optional items and what we've come up with. So the next steps, like I say, we're going to continue to look at ways to keep the project costs down. That is number one priority for us. And as much as that, I'd also like to make sure that we keep the rates down. I know that's something that affects everybody in the city, and we're very conscious of that. And continue communicating with the community. We have a postcard queued up to send out to the community about impacts to the park. And we have a newsletter that we're working on to help inform the community. Our website is updated on a regular basis and has pretty much everything we've ever sat down here in front of you and talked about. It's on the oakharborcleanwater.org. And continuing with the thought of reaching out to the community, Brett and I it feels like we're available 24/7. I hate to say that, but we live and breathe this project. So anything that comes up, we're there to help as best we can. Here we go. Not 80 slides.
Councilor West.
So for this GMP 13, all the critical things that you mentioned in order to not mess with the final completion of the wastewater treatment plant, like the lines and the this and getting electrical, those are all part of the mitigation, right? Those are all on the column on our sheet that are coming out of the sewer fund, correct?
Correct.
So for GMP 13, and I certainly at this point don't feel comfortable with some of the price tags on the items coming out of the general fund, and without seeing other bids, without looking at like what are the other bids. I mean, these aren't wastewater treatment plants, these are buildings, pavilions, maintenance structures. Can't we approve a GMP 13 that just has the mitigation items on it that are needed to get the project done and that we're responsible for doing to complete the project from the sewer rate payers and the sewer fund, and break out, and if we're not ready, if we need more time and want to look more into some of these other options for the general fund, do that separate, just so we can move this along?
You know, that is an option. That is certainly something that we can do. The caution I would pose is that when we do that, the bids that we have for the alternate items may very well expire. We're going to do our best to extend them out a little bit, but there's only so much of that we can do before the bidders move on. And you can imagine if you're bidding on a project this time of year, that's to keep your summer busy. And if we postpone our decision, that means they find other work and maybe we don't have as favorable bids.
And those items were publicly bid, so there were multiple bids that came in on those.
Were those any local companies, or were they all out of town? Are we gonna see all the bids in our packet?
You know, actually, and we will, and we can show all the bids that we have. We have P&L bid on a lot of the structures that we have, and they're
And Valdez.
Valdez bid on it, but they weren't successful on those.
P&L would.
P&L was, but Valdez, they also.
Submitted a bid.
See, that shows on this sheet.
Yeah, I see those, yeah. On this sheet too, the funding breakdown, I don't see the east kitchen.
East Kitchen.
I only see the west.
East Kitchen is included in turnkey structures.
Oh, okay.
And there's also a couple other minor things involved with that also.
Okay. I just am having a hard time for these kitchens, almost $1 million. I mean, that seems, how many square feet are we talking about? What are we, I mean, what is not $1 million in a kitchen?
I understand it oversimplifies it, calling it a kitchen. You know, it's an industrial structure that has to withstand the elements of being close to the waterfront like it is, and hopefully last the city a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bit more to it than you might expect for a cost for a house or a business further away from the waterfront.
And you're thinking that's probably in the materials that they're using to withstand, is that a big
Yeah,
part
and
of it, or?
And it's, you know, once again, it's one of those that it's not, I don't think there's anything super unique about these structures. It's just the durability of them. I don't know how better to explain it. But we did get multiple bids, and there was, this was the lowest of the bids, and it came from a local contractor.
I assume you'd say the same about a maintenance building for $700,000.
Yeah.
When I thought, I hope there's an indoor football practice facility, like, included in that price. I mean, that's a lot of money for a shop, basically. I'm assuming it would be just a big garage, or is there something else in that
Well, you know,
maintenance building?
That's a great discussion to have, and I'm not sure what the right answer is. We put together a design with our architect that was vetted by the public, and we put it out to bid, and this is how the bids came back. I wish it was lower, as you do, but there was more than one bid, and if that's the lowest one.
Mm-hmm.
But to that end, we'll have the bid tabs in the packet, and we can also, if you'd like to spend some time individually to go through the items of concern, we're available to do that as well.
Thank you, that's all I have for now.
Yes, Councilor Wiesner.
Hold on just one sec. Trevor, you have something?
I just have one caution. If you were just to take the sewer fund or the mitigation
Hey,
efforts.
Trevor, why don't you come up and get closer to the microphone and introduce yourself?
Sorry for the interruption. I saw him squirming in the back and thought I'd let him.
I'm squirming a little bit. Trevor Tays, I'm with Hoffman Construction Company. The one caution I would make, if you simply took the column of the general fund items, what we have for mitigation, and took all of the items that we put in the general fund category and set them all aside, it will most likely cost you more to redevelop those, because now you're going to seed an area establish that lawn. Now you're gonna come back and now try to reestablish, dig into that, establish the subgrade, the foundations, rather than doing it as part of the course of the construction. So I might suggest that you look at what are the ones I'd like to have out of that general fund and go from that attitude. And then those that you do want to defer, recognize they will probably be more costly in the future because of the reasons that Joe mentioned and what I'm bringing up. So that's why I wanted to make sure I cautioned you on that.
Thank you.
Councilor Wiesman?
Thank you. First off, Joe, I gotta tell you how much I appreciate the fact you're in the hot seat again today. Yeah, and I do have some tough questions for you, and hopefully you understand I do appreciate that you're here to answer them for us, okay? So first off, I want to make sure that I totally understand this in clear terminology. We had $5.3 million, if I remember correct, is the amount we had budgeted for the sewer fund portion of this, because I'm going to tackle these as two separate entities, because I understand and I'm tracking you very well, and I appreciate your clarifications on this. But $5.3 million, and that bid is now coming at $12.4 million. So we blew that bid by $7 million. It's over double of what the engineer's estimates were. And any indication of why, other than we just blew it, or?
There's a couple different things in there that, right off the top of my head, the original estimate didn't include demolition of the Woodby Island Bank building, which is about $500,000. There's, I had this all rehearsed earlier. Just give me a moment to think. So there's paving inside the yard was another item, and then the gates were another one, which were a couple hundred. No, I'm misquoting.
$299,000 I know is for automated gates.
Yeah, it's telescoping automated gates, and we're working on ways to reduce that cost
Versus
too.
the piece of 4x4, 6x6 we've been lifting out
Yeah,
successfully for the
well,
last
it's
50 years.
The gate is a masterpiece in itself. To create an opening that's automated that we can control from inside as well. It's not a manual gate, and it has a unique construction to it. The paving inside the yard I mentioned, and then there's the allowance for earthwork of $850,000 is also in that $12 million.
Yeah, which I'm glad you brought up, because I'm doing very, very simple math here. I don't have I'm doing the calculator. But $850,000 worth of adjustment of miscellaneous earthwork over a 6-month period on a 22-day work month, assuming no holidays or anything else, is $6,500 a day. That's 3 pieces of equipment moving 8 hours a day at $260 an hour for 6 months. Kind of having a tough time with that figure on top of the $3.3 million and $2.3 million up above for hardscaping and landscaping for moving a pile of dirt. So and there's some others that I'll get with you one-on-one off of this bid to talk about, such as the potential archaeological impacts. Not quite understanding that when we had the archaeological folks down there going through every bit of that dirt as we were piling it up. I don't know why we have another $68,000 worth of archaeological impacts budgeted to unpile the dirt that we had archaeologists on sites piling. So, but I'll get with you though one-on-one on those.
Sure.
I'm mainly concerned about the $7 million overrun, because the reality is it's now putting us $27 million over on the cost of the sewage treatment plant. Is that correct? From our original budgets, we were $20 million over as of our workshop in February, and now this is an additional $7 million that we've gone over budget.
So words are really important in how we present this.
That's why I want to make sure I'm clear on
Because what we presented in September of 2016 was 122 million. And then we came back on March 5th with 140. There was a significant time difference in that. We didn't even have complete design drawings at that time. So that's why there's additional earthwork, is because they were working off assumptions, and then when reality came in, we had additional earthwork to do.
And those were estimates.
And those were estimates, that's why there are allowances for
Well,
that.
and I guess I'll rephrase
So-
my question. So this is an additional $7 million, this is $7 million over the budget as of our last workshop presentation.
It was over the estimate that we had in, as a placeholder.
It's
in-
the estimate's
on
our
March
budget.
5th. It's the number we're working from. I don't know that they're the same thing.
Okay. So we don't have a budget until we have an estimate, and so when we have an estimate, so we're $7 million over our estimated completion cost that was presented the last workshop.
Thank you for working with me on that.
Yeah, okay. And again, I appreciate the answering the questions. I know they're hard to answer. I just want to make sure I have this clear in my mind. And roughly, you've given us, a few things, the gates and the paving, and then the demolition of the Woodby Island Bank building, which I'll say right now, I think I've questioned since coming on council. But what would you think? A couple of $1 million worth of
At
add-ins
most,
at most? So that still puts us about double of our original estimates. Is that pretty normal for public engineering projects from engineer initial estimates?
I wouldn't consider it normal, no.
Okay, and where was that estimate derived from?
It was originated in the Windjammer Park integration plan as a high-level estimate prepared by a subcontractor for Corollo. And then it was updated again when we expanded the phase one. And it stayed relatively close to the 10 million, even with the 30% contingency built in. And the one time Hoffman clearly looked at the bid set as it was developing, and off the cuff, just a rough order of magnitude said that they were believing it was going to be closer to 15 million. So we knew that there was, as we talked about on the 5th, we knew there was going to be a gap coming. We just didn't know how much until we opened the bids.
And you mentioned that the bids have been received for almost 45 days?
March
No.
1st was the first bid opening, the 15th was the second opening, and then we had another after that as well. But the major ones were on 22nd. The major ones were opened on, the first 5 were opened on the 1st.
And is that normal that the bid expiration is from 45 days or so of receipt versus the closing of a bid period? So if it's one of the first bidders that bid that we opened on March 1st, we're obligated to that timeline starting from the date we opened the bid?
Yes. It can sometimes be negotiated out further, and can be from time to time, but when you start talking 90 or 120 days, there's a limit to what they'll hold on to that number for.
I'm just concerned, it's a big decision for council to make, and obviously time is not our friend in making decisions, and you stressed that during your presentation. I guess my initial comment is I am concerned with the bid amount for the sewer fund. I'm also very concerned about the items that in the general fund, what you're calling the optional items. Quite honestly, I see those as being less optional, maybe as others. This is something we promised the community. This is something that we made a commitment to our town that let us build the sewage treatment plant downtown, and we're going to hand you back this facility to be proud of. This is our crown jewel. This is our legacy. I can assign a whole mess of names to it, and I'm concerned about retaining as many of those items within reason as possible. I'm gonna second Councilmember Wassinger's sediments on the price of the kitchens and Hank's maintenance barn, Hank's castle, but you deserve it though, Hank. You know, I'm going to second my concern, and of course, trying to get into this whole government thing and wrapping my head around, you know, government costs, being a private sector builder for many years and having built stuff for a lot less per square foot than that. But I think the accoutrements, the water park, the things that we have promised this town are probably, in fact, I think more so important than some of these things on the sewer fund list. And I realize some of this stuff has to be completed to complete the project, but I am going to ask to meet with staff and to look at the things from the sewer fund side of this program that can not be done, that we can cut costs there. I don't think we should be cutting costs at the cost of what we have committed to our citizens. And finally, I do have a concern with part of how we propose to pay for this $7 million cost overrun on the sewer fund site. You're talking about taking the $1.425 million contingency cash surplus that we have currently in the fund and applying all of that to this particular cost overrun.
No.
Is that not correct?
That $1,425,000, we've secured funding in excess of $1,425,303 for the clean water facility and the GMPs. So it isn't a separate funding stream. It's just excess funds.
Well, I understand that. We had a $5.2 million excess fund at the beginning of this. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not sure where the 5.2.
Well, you've got cash surplus here
He's talking reserves. That's
of the reserves.
It's completely opposite.
totally different.
No.
Okay.
The 1.425 is what's sitting there as cash based on what funding we've secured and what budget for expenditures we have for the clean water facility.
And 70% through expenditures on the clean water facility, we're pretty confident we're not going to need those reserves for any other.
It isn't reserves. What that $1,425,000 is funding that we have secured for the SRF loans, the revenue bonds.
You're calling it cash surplus.
Cash surplus, exactly.
Okay.
That doesn't go into anything other than just this project. So that's excess money sitting there for changes. And so GMP 13 is a change.
But it appears as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the $5.2 million in cash surplus we've used $2.4 million of it during this 70% expenditure that we've made to date on the plant. We've had to dig in to this $5.2 million cash surplus.
Okay, so that's what's confusing. I
Yeah.
get where you're coming from. Okay, so the.
I'm on page 13,
25,
sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, page
13 on paper, slide 25.
So
Slide 25, yeah.
the total project expenditures are the ones that are identified specifically with building the building. The total financing and transfers, that 2.4 million, that's for supporting the debt and other costs that really don't tie into the building of the building, but are cash needs that we have to finish this project.
Okay.
So that isn't a surplus, that's built in. So when you take what we anticipate for that out, it still leaves a cash surplus before GMP 13 of $1,425,000. That's just cash that's sitting there for potential changes. So that cash isn't in the cumulative reserve. It isn't anywhere other than in this project.
Okay.
And then the $1 million is from the system development fees that's set up as a separate fund for sewer. So.
And we don't have any concerns with 30% of the project left to be completed, that we might have other needs for other cash surplus. In other words, that we're going to end up now with a cash surplus balance of 0. And if we need to go to the surplus, there's going to be nothing left.
No, you're still gonna have we still have our operating reserve, which is 25% of our revenues, right? That is always taken right off the top. We don't ever get to touch that.
But you get my concern, anytime we're taking something down to 0, that's,
Right.
I see being called a surplus or a reserve, well, then there's 0 left
Well, yeah.
to go to.
You could look at it that way, but this financial is just identified project revenue, project costs.
Okay.
The money you're talking about, the 25%, that's sitting in 402. That isn't even part of this yet. We haven't pulled anything out of 402 other than what we planned for when we started this project.
Okay,
The monthly financials that we have shows the revenue piece as well as this. We just showed this for this presentation to show the expenses,
Okay.
not the revenue side, so you could see what had been identified.
okay,
So the 1.425 is for things that potentially change, and if the GMPs are final with GMP 13, and that's the last GMP we're going to do, using this 1.425 out of funding that we've identified for the project is better than taking extra out of fund balance in 402, because we're gonna need to get it from somewhere.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, understand. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilor Servatius?
Just a quick follow-on to that for clarification, I think this cash surplus that you're showing here that Mr. Wiesner was referencing, that doesn't include the contingency balances, correct?
It does not.
Okay,
If there's any that's to be returned to the city, that's not in there.
okay,
But the full budget for the GMP, including contingency, is here, right? So the full budget for the treatment plant is in these budgeted numbers, excepting GMP 13. So in here currently, the GMP 13 includes whatever contingencies
Okay.
are built into those.
okay. My question, I'm gonna bring it up a little more to the 30,000-foot level. If I could find wherever I wrote them. One of the things I think, and if we haven't publicly apologized to the public, let me be one of the first. One of the challenges I think we've had here is we have not had a budget. We pursued, and there is a difference between an estimate and a budget. We have pursued this heavy civil GCCM process for the first time. And so while we have our best guesstimates, very different than design bid build, we have never set a budget for this project. So as a council, I think we all share in that, and I know that's been discussed. That's one of the challenges we have is it's not like building a home and many other things that people are used to. I only have this much money. I've got to make this happen. We may be at a point now where we have to say, we only have this much money. This ain't going to happen. I don't know if we're there yet. I have the same headache right now that I had the same time, or was when I last saw these numbers in the construction treatment meeting and trying to reconcile where do we go from here. I appreciate what Councilmember Wiesner said that we promised, and I voted for. I came into this when I came on council. The process was well underway, but I voted for this to go into Windjammer Park, hoping that it would be a catalyst and a genesis of all sorts of redevelopment down there. And so I try and balance that promise that's been made with being a good steward of public resources, and that's probably why I have such a tremendous headache at the moment. I want to touch on a couple of these things, and tell me if I'm wrong. We're talking about on the agenda bill and approving GMP 13. We don't have all of the money we need. Did I miss that in the slide? We need about 9.5. Did we account for all of that?
If we choose to award GMP 3 and GMP 13, and we do everything in the sewer fund, and in the general fund, we do the hardscape and splash park, we have the money to do that.
If we can draw down stability fund, or
Thank you for, that's what I was looking for, the right way to phrase that.
Thank you.
So if we draw down the stability fund, we have enough to do everything in the sewer fund column, the splash park and the hardscape and landscaping and extra electrical that goes along with it.
Okay, so I understood that. So we don't have enough to do all of this.
Correct.
Right now,
And that's,
okay.
and we have a grant application in for 2 more of the elements, the pavilion and the west kitchen.
Okay. I too share, well, we probably all have the same feeling. On some of these numbers, and Hank, it's nothing, you deserve a building. I know we keep mentioning Hank. But, and I appreciate the nature of the construction materials, that they've got to stand up to the weather and they've got to stand up to the public and all of that extra use. But a maintenance building, can we not just have a decent framed building with cement board siding and a decent roof that would last for, but I don't want to build everything on the cheap down there, that's for sure. We've seen things that are built on the cheap that in 15, 20 years, that was not a good investment. But when I see a number like that, and I'm not in the construction business, I have to think you could go build a cement block building with some it's over in the corner there, somehow have some architectural detail on it, decent roof, give parks the resources they need, and it still can't touch that dollar amount, but maybe I'm completely wrong. So when that little bit of doubt creeps in, and this is not beating up staff, that same doubt starts to creep in across the board here. I built a home in 06, 07 at the height of the frenzy. We paid a premium for everything we put in that home, and I don't want to make that same mistake right now. If we're in kind of a building frenzy, don't need to answer, just hold whatever thought you got. I do appreciate the mobilization, remobilization that Trevor touched on. I sincerely appreciate all of that. My thoughts right now is we have to deliver to the public to some degree with a splash park or some of those accoutrements that Mr. Wiesner mentioned around the park. And as I talked to in the staff meeting we talked about a parking lot. You guys threw out a number of 50 to 80,000. I don't remember what that number was to asphalt that. Is that still realistic?
That's something we can talk about. We have a price to take out some of that parking.
Because somewhere in here I saw, I don't know if the 1.7 for Windjammer 2, 3, 4, and 5 alternates phase 2. Is that all of the hardscape in orange right down here, this 1.7?
Yes. That's, so the table up at the top left, so if you see all the items labeled phase 2,
Okay.
that's all part of that hardscape, landscape and electrical site work. So we have added hardscape at 1.3 million, planting, deleting the seeded area, so that's a deductive. And then electrical work carrying over at almost 400,000.
So I think it would be, if we move forward with this, it would be strange not to at least complete the parking lot. Now, whether or not we do maintenance buildings, kitchens, some of that stuff, if we don't have the funding, but if we can at least get the parking lot completed, to me, that makes sense. Otherwise, that's very wonky to come back and do that.
And that's part of the plan that we've proposed.
Okay. With the hardscapes and the splash park. All right.
Everything in red on there and in blue is what we believe that we can do with a little bit of effort on our part and get the funding for it. Now, the buildings that are in gray on here are the ones that we don't currently have the money for. However, we do have a grant in for 2 of them.
And I guess last but not least that I'll touch on, Mary, you had sent out, or at least sent some of us an email, I said myself and Mr. Allenberg that are on that committee about the C2G firm taking a look at these numbers. I almost don't want to, can you speak to that? I don't want to necessarily make a decision or have people making a decision until we know.
I wish I could speak more than I really can. We have a hour and a half conference call scheduled for tomorrow with C2G and staff. And I'll know a lot better about, what they've had a chance to look at after that. I'd be happy to communicate out with council what I learned. I know we're just kind of right in the middle of this, but believe me, I think you probably also know that when I first got these numbers, I stopped this project for a few days. The staff is being asked the very same questions pretty much that we have discussed, and so thank you. You'll probably get to answer them another time or two before the final decisions are made. But anyway, sorry, I elaborated a little too long.
I appreciate the input. I know where we're at with that. So I'll yield at that point. Like I said, I know we have a major promise that we've made here, but I'm having a hard time signing off on that. All right.
Councilor Ives.
Of course, you call on me and I blanked out. First, I want to clarify on the optional items versus what we've promised the public. When we say optional, do we mean don't do them or do we mean delay?
My personal opinion is that this is the first phase of a multi-phase park improvement project. Mm-hmm. So if for some reason the grant doesn't come through or we choose not to do the splash park now, we'll be working on another grant application and talking to you about it the next budget cycle.
That's my impression as well. You know, this isn't our one shot, so when I look at a list that says optional, I interpret that as not in this step, but it's not that we won't deliver what has been promised. Having said that, since we're disrupting the park, I'd like to get as much done in one shot as possible. A couple of funding ideas, options, possibilities, I don't remember how we put that, but and you guys may have already thought of all of these, but I was just taking notes. One of the ones I written down was LTAC for Pavilion, Splash Park, ball fields. I don't remember the capital improvement versus marketing restrictions on those, but I think there's a number of elements that might qualify for economic development granting. Those pickleball players, they're very enthusiastic. Maybe they have a booster club. Maybe they want to pay for some of the benches around the courts. I don't know. There might be something. And I'm also thinking about how strongly the public feels about the water play element. And there was a petition circulating at the beginning of this process, started by someone who shall remain unnamed. And it was signed by 2,100 people in the span of a couple weeks, maybe less than that. I'm thinking if those 2,100 people all put in $20, if they feel so strongly about this, that cuts $42,000 off the price of the splash park. I mean, it's, in the big picture, it's really pennies, but I feel like every little bit would help at this point. I wrote some other stuff down, but I lost track of it. I'm just kind of spitballing here. That's what I got.
Thank you. You're finished? A couple quick items here on your presentation on slide 21, our page 21, GMP 13 breakdown, that summary you have. Something that jumps out at me under negotiated support services under the sewer fund, that amount is under bit items is $8,000, or excuse me, $8 million. Under general fund, it's $3,700,000 and some change. But take a look at the cost of negotiated support services. The bigger number is $223,000, and the smaller number, which is half the size, is more expensive, $275,000. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, we've had a conversation, and you guys correct me if I misrepresent this, but negotiated support services are generally a factor of time, and as we do the additional general funded items, it's a longer time on the clock to provide those services.
Because of the structures that are in there, the finishes and improvements in there after the site work stuff. Is that where we're going with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Longer.
Okay.
It's like things like fences.
So that may be adjusted depending on how we cherry pick these GMP 13 general fund items, correct?
We'll be talking about
Yeah,
it, yes.
all right, we'll be talking about that, I'm sure we will. And then under the GMP 10 allowance for adjustment, you have $850,000. We spent quite a bit of time talking about that. But answer this question, yes or no, do we have $850,000 still there, or has it already been committed?
It's already been committed.
And how much is left?
I believe, well, that's a difficult way to ask the question. I'm trying to figure out the right way to answer it.
Well, while you're thinking about it, the next part to my question is how much can we expect at the completion of that 850 be remaining? Because we are backfilling GMP 10, which was site excavation. And what we're doing is just backfilling an allowance because the contractor has already been paid. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily money available to be spent.
Let's see if I can.
Except for that, that's already been committed.
And I might need Trevor to come up and help me with this, but I'm going to give it a shot. So in GMP 10, we had roughly $375,000 in there for an allowances for earthwork. That was a long time ago. They've used that allowance and that bid item to do more work. And it's actually more than 850,000 more.
More work that was authorized.
That was authorized
by us, okay?
by us.
Okay.
Right now, it's kind of in limbo. It's like overdrawn on a GMP, on a particular line item. We can choose to increase the allowance through this GMP. We can choose to go through a change order process, which we have only done one that I know of, which they're allowed to do by contract when we go over an allowance to adjust it in this way. Or we could draw down the contingency fund to something I would consider dangerously low at this point in the project.
Okay, and I understand that, because we have 3% contingency, the contractor contingency, 2% design or owner's contingency, that's 5% on this job. If it's something short of $5 million, and we've drawn that down, where are we down now to a net on that drawdown?
On the owner's contingency, the last pay request I saw was about 250,000, and I can't remember what the GCCM risk contingency was off the top of my head. But it was in the million, not quite $1.5 million area.
Something to consider on that with the contingency. Sorry, Ben Larson and Hoffman. So what you see on the pay requests, are contingency balances that haven't been fully actualized at this point. So they've been approved, but they haven't been billed out. So if there's a change, say we're adding a TV over here, but that TV hasn't been installed, that's already been approved, but it hasn't been billed out until the work is complete. So what we're looking at for contingencies right now, knowing that there's unforeseen stuff coming up with some coordination issues that we're looking at, is about 1.2 million for the contractor contingency.
There we go.
And if you take the 850, which is actually on the low end, it's closer to 900,000. You're looking at 200,000 maybe.
So 200,000 is only that's the net balance right now in those combined contingencies.
If you were to fully fund.
Yes, fully funded, because we
Correct.
made commitments. Those are committed items.
Let's see.
That's regarding the
So we
change order.
went through this, like you said, last week a little bit more. We have some, I don't know if we want to get into the specifics of where some of these exposures are.
What I'm really looking at is, what is the bottom line right now of that contingency? We had $4.5 million in it. Now we're backfilling it with another $850. What can we expect today that balance should be? And where's our exposure on that?
If I can. Trevor Cheese of Hoffman. So let's not mix contingencies and the allowance. So the original allowance for miscellaneous earthwork was set up at $375,000, okay? We exceeded the 375. Again, the work under this miscellaneous earthwork was because it was almost impossible to bid with the state of the project at the time, and the project design was not complete.
60% design.
Right, project was not complete. So we did a unit price structure that we competitively bid. Interwest was successful, and we worked against that unit price structure since GMP 10. We've exceeded the 375, and what Ben has projected now is with an additional $850,000 increase to that allowance, we're going to have, we think, about $100,000 less when we're complete with the miscellaneous earthwork scope.
Okay, I understand that, and I understand you clarifying, don't misunderstand or combine allowances and contingency.
Right.
What I'm talking about is contingency right now in this conversation.
Okay.
For 3% Hoffman, 2% the owner, it came out to about $4.5 million. And for a variety of reasons, there have been approved billings against that, not including the 350 allowance. Okay, now we are going to put the 850 back into, we're gonna call it allowance, but it's still part of that combined allowance and contingency.
It will be in that allowance account.
Right,
Mr. Olmert.
okay. I would like to know what today is the balance in that contingency if we approve transferring this $850 in to cover the allowance.
Okay.
There's a number in there.
Let's just talk about contingency then, all right?
Okay,
Let's just talk
that's
about
right.
contingency. So right now, with all known exposures to contingency that we have, either in front of Joe and Brett or
That have been
pending,
approved, they're
or
commitments.
pending, okay?
Yeah.
We have a balancing in our contingency of $817,000. Not the earthwork allowance, this is risk contingency,
Right,
okay?
850 on
We,
your side.
we
Okay.
see a couple other looming boogeymen out there that we're holding reserves against
Yeah,
for the assembly of the dryer. There's some
Sure.
issues. I won't
Okay.
take council
Yep.
down that road of details. About 175,000. There's also some coordination issues with our process mechanical and electrical and the way the equipment comes to the site and the coordination of the contracts. That's about another 200,000. If you take that from what we have currently know as hard commits, we have about we'd have a risk contingency balance of 442,000.
Okay, all right.
Now,
then
that-
we have the owner's side of the contingency.
and you have, and the
How much
owner's,
is that?
and the owner's side contingency, I think you're down to like $64,000 right now.
We're that low, huh?
Yeah,
It's that low.
yeah. So, if we add the $850,000 to the miscellaneous earthwork allowance, and we, based on our projection, somewhere about $100,000 should be remaining out of that, which can transfer back to
Yeah,
contingency,
All
okay?
right. Okay, that, you answered my question.
Okay.
I want to know,
Yeah.
we've had this pot of money in there, and it has, anyway, you answered my question, I don't need to go any more.
I do have one comment on this.
Yes.
Is we do have some other transfers that are taking place. This is just where we stand now. There are some credits coming back to us also.
Oh, how much?
Not sure yet, yeah, I can say, but we are due some
Okay,
things.
so I need to move along here.
If you don't mind, Mr. Olmert, before they leave, I just have a quick question to follow up. So I just want to understand, the $850,000 earthwork allowance, part of this is to cover an overage on another GMP?
Yeah, so GMP 10
Okay.
established a $375,000 allowance for this miscellaneous earthwork. That wasn't based on an estimate. It was like, it's a plug number that was an extension of the unit prices that we had competitively bid by the contractors, okay? Just this, it's basically seed money to start that earthwork. Yes, we have exceeded that 375 by a considerable amount, and we need the 850 to restore the allowance, which is the way the contract is set up.
So instead of that going, the overage going against our contingency monies or anything else, we're rolling it over into another GMP.
Correct. Well-
So this 850,000 is included in GMP
It-
12, isn't really for GMP 12 work,
GMP
I mean 13 work.
Correct. The options, the contract states that allowances will be reconciled by a change order. So you could do a change order, which would be a separate council action, or you can just roll it in as part of the GMP 13 amendment, which we thought was the more natural way to go about it, but. Okay.
Thank you for letting me.
Yeah,
And thank you.
yeah, I explained that GMP 10 or GMP 8, what we're talking about with the 375 was actually done in November of 2016. We hadn't even started the final site design of this thing yet, so this plug was to give us some room, and we've used it pretty effectively since then, and the pricing we had for it
But
was.
we paid 850 out of the contingency now, to satisfy the invoice for Hoffman at that time. That's how they got paid, right?
In other words, how have we been able to pay for it? We basically, you show an overdraw on that schedule value line items,
Yep.
right? But you haven't overspent the total GMP,
Yeah.
right?
I understand.
But that line item would show negative.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. I'm gonna move along here then. On GMP 13, in my opinion, council can obviously do what they want to do. Do not delay the wastewater treatment plant by holding up GMP 13, and I'll tell you why, in my opinion. Windjammer Park bid item number 1, which is the demo of that building. The price, the bid price, these are bid prices, these aren't Hoffman prices. The bid price between the first and second bidder, there's a 24% spread there. In other words, that contractor left 24% on the table, okay? I don't want to rebid that item because all the other contractors have seen his number and it's all they're going to do is target that number. He left that much money on the table. He's going to up that thing probably 10%. And the other people will probably chase it. Whatever happens, it isn't going to be in our favor. Since this is a GMP, Hoffman has accepted these bids, recognized them, you vetted them. Hoffman has the bond. They're financially obligated to us. I will take the demo one, and we're fools if we don't take that one. Windjammer Park number 2. It includes, these numbers include the alternate phase 2 hardscapes on this. That one, number 2 is clearing excavate. This is a big item. Utilities and paving. The spread between the low, there are only 2 bidders on this now. The spread between the low and the second bidder is 25%. He left 25% on the table. You put this out for bid, you may get 1 bidder, they may up that price. You may get 2 bidders, the upper one will chase the lower one. I wouldn't do that. That's not in our best interest. This is a good number for us. Thank you, Hoffman, because you guys have to back it up. It's a GMP, guaranteed maximum, okay? The landscape fine grade on Windjammer Park bid item number 3, that is a real tight bid there. There's a 1% spread between the first and the second. And there's a 17% spread between the first and the third. So, you know, you better take that one also. So I don't want to hold up this project for this. On number 4, bid item number 4, that's 2 local contractors, P&L and Valdez. The base bids, there is like $100 and some thousand. It's 22% difference between P&L and Valdez if you take the whole package. But those are the items that we can cherry pick out of that too. We need to look at that one really carefully, but there again, when you have a 22% spread, when you have those kind of spreads, in my experience, either you have a not very well prepared bid document so that there's a lot of change order opportunity, or somebody is really hungry and somebody thinks that there's not enough people on the bid list, which often they do. They'll see who's bidding and they will have a high bid thinking they may be the only one to get the job, or other people thinking that it's going to be high so they up the thing. But either way, for our best interest, I think we should take some form of bid item number 4. Number 5, between the electrical first and the second, that's again a more sensible connection there between those bids. That's only a 5% spread on that between Valley and Valdez. So when you think of delay in this project, the delays to Hoffman, delay claims potentially by Hoffman, mechanical and electrical, could substantially burn us more than what we're paying for half a kitchen or something like that. So however we come out of this thing, we should not delay the project. That's all I have to say.
Yes,
I'm
Councilor
sorry.
Wassinger.
Last thing, I don't see anywhere, and I've not heard any talk of our windmill. So where are we at with that in this phase or plan? I know that's super important to our community, and I don't see any drawings of it or price tag on moving that, repairing it, restoring it, whatever you want to do with it.
Maybe I turn it back around. What would council like to do with the windmill?
We're talking about a lot of money here, and I personally, since I brought it up, I'll go first. I think it needs to be in here somewhere. I think either there's options. Obviously, we've gone round about this before. It either needs to be restored, repaired, put the blades back on or fix them, or it needs to be maybe if we need to relocate it. I just feel like it's something that I am, in my time on council, I feel like that windmill and is an issue that touched people more than maybe anything, or it's up there in the top 5 in years that I've been here. So it's obviously something that is important to my constituents. So I think we need to, by the time we approve this at our council meeting, it needs to be in here somewhere, a plan for it. And I don't know if anybody else has any grand ideas on where to put it, how to do it, but I'll think about it for sure.
So I heard a city staff rumor that we had a bid to move it that was decent.
There's much more to it than that. We did get, Kathy, you want to talk to this one? Because I know that Hank got a bid to move the structure, but it didn't include everything involved.
Yes, Hank did speak with a mover who could move the windmill, but we would have to build a new base for it. I think, Hank, correct me if I'm wrong, or is he gone? He's gone, but I think it was in the around $54,000 or something to move it. But we would have to build a new base, and then we would have to restore the blades. What I was thinking was coming forward in the budget process to talk to council about how we want to, do we want to just restore the blades and leave it where it is? Because it was originally planned to be moved in a future phase of the park. So if we wanted, if we restore the blades through our budget process of 2019, if we want to move it at a future date, we can move it. It just will be in a better condition until we make that choice. So that's kind of what Hank and I have talked about.
Can you show us on the map where it is right now, like compared to the red?
It's pretty close to where the number 2 is on there.
Oh, where the number 2 is, or where
A
the
little
number
bit
2 is pointing?
further to the north and
Where the
east of
circle
there.
number 2 is, okay.
Yeah,
2 circle number 2.
the top
Right
one.
here.
It gets really close to where that the red line. Well, I don't know if I have. That's not the right drawing.
Go ahead.
There. How's that?
So that's the windmill in that picture?
Yeah.
Without, yeah, okay.
We
Okay,
always,
Except for that one has blades.
as Cassie said, we always anticipated it remaining, so the project was neutral to it.
okay.
So it could stay where it's at. I mean, conceivably, you're not going to.
The intent is in the future for the plaza area to extend to a stage about where it is now, but we had planned on leaving it where it is for this phase of work.
Councilor Savini.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Holmberg, I always appreciate your math and the work you do. What was the separation on number 4? That was the only one I didn't catch.
Number 4, between P&L and Valdez, and this is the base bid plus the alternates is 22% spread.
So a question, being a fan of statistics, if we only have on those on all of those we have 2 bids, one we had 3.
You had 2 bids on that one, you had 3 on number 3, you had 2 bids on bid item number 2. That's a big item, that's $4,800,000 base bid and alternate 1. And then you had 5 bids on the demo for bid number 1. That's the demo of the bank building.
So while I appreciate the argument of the spread and not wanting to go back out statistically as far as the sampling, I don't know if that's a strong sampling of bids in a hot market. People are busy. Both those local firms you named, I know are very busy right now, both on the base and with some of the, one of them is involved with the current project. Nothing against them, but that would be my concern as far as a good solid statistical sampling of bids. When you only have 1 or 2 bidders, and then some of these we didn't have bids.
Comment on that. The one thing, Joel, that we need to consider on this is which items, if there are items in bid package 4, that would delay the project. The delay of the project will not help us.
I don't disagree with that, and I don't know if we can solve it today, but 4 specifically, that's a lot of the à la carte stuff, it looks like. We're
That
looking at
is,
here.
it's the west kitchen, the pavilion, the maintenance building. Those are the 3 items that aren't in there. So the difference between almost $960,000 and $1,350,000 is whatever that is.
Right, so the
350
question now-
it's pushing $500,000 between those two. But on the base bid, I think in the base bid, this, under structures, there's a bunch of items in there that are part of, that are in our critical path. I don't know that, just looking at it right at this moment, but that certainly merits consideration.
And I guess where I'm going with that, can you send out somehow, Joe, possibly I don't think we're getting this decision done today. It may take a whole nother workshop, because we have to decide what do we want and what are we willing / able to pay for. And then we have to design a GMP around that.
Well, we have a short timeline between now and when these bids expire. We don't have a lot of time in this thing. So, if we think that bid items 1, 2, and 3 and 5 are goes, then I think we gotta be telling the staff, get on your horse and let's start riding, because you don't want to wait too long and then lose these bids. I mean, you have some really good bids in here. And if you think that we're gonna go out on the market, by the time you take the time to go on the market, advertise for bids, do the bid opening, we will go past, in my opinion, we'll go past the expiration date that these people are required to hold their bids. Is that correct, Joe?
I think what we would end up doing is foregoing those bids and rebidding it.
And I'm not willing to take that risk.
I mean, what else are we hoping to have change with the design that's gonna affect the bids?
Councilor Reason.
So, make sure I understand the bid process. When did we initially go out to bid, and how long a period did we have that we were accepting the bids?
We got the final drawings in December, I believe January 18th. We advertised it and opened the first packages on the March 1st.
And the bids were closed on what date?
March 1st was for the first 5, March 15th for the 6th package, and the 7th one was on the 28th.
So roughly that's 60 days from the
That a good
time.
amount of time.
Yeah. Is it normal to get just 2 bids on projects?
It varies depending on what it is, and I mean, we, you know,
Some had no bids, some had 1 bid.
During the
During
previous,
the process.
Okay.
during this process.
Very process.
well, an example of that is the wood framing for the admin building. We got 0 bids. We put it out to bid twice, got 0 bids, and we ended up working with Hoffman, and they're using local labor as part of their Hoffman structures to do that work.
And of course, I guess I need to point out that why I appreciate Mr. Almberg's argument. The opposite could be true if by going out for bid, we rebid, we could find that there's contractors out there that look at these and go, oh boy, I would have done it for that or less, and we could possibly find ourselves with new contractors coming into the big package, because obviously this is now public information, so it could go the opposite direction if there is contractors out there interested in doing the work.
So let me use another project as an example, which we'll also be bringing forward on April 17th. So last year we did a water main replacement program on O'Leary, and it was about $1.5 million. We had 1 bidder. We bid that late in the season, had a very short construction window, put a lot of constraints on it, and we ended up with something right at or above the engineer's estimate. This second time around, we have another one coming forward. We were very aggressive in getting the drawings completed early, and getting it on the street. And we actually had it shortened the bid window so that we could get a contractor on board so they would know that they had work this summer. And the same amount of work, similar amount of work, $1.5 million budget, the low bid was $1 million. So there's more to it than it's timing and season and workload and the type of work. But I really don't believe that if we go back and try to rebid this, that it's going to be any better than what we're seeing. And in fact, it'll extend the schedule and cost us more because we'll have to pay to manage it at that point, that much longer.
So you mentioned constraints. Is there anything we could do if we were to rebid this in which we could change the parameters or the constraints within the work that may be more conducive to getting additional bids?
Yes, sir. Please come on up.
Trevor Tees with Hoffman Construction. So some of the dynamics we face, particularly at Oak Harbor, have been the market in the Puget Sound area drawing away some of the larger players that we would typically have. I mean, even trying to get gypsum wallboard work done, we were unable to get multiple bidders. Ultimately, I think we had one bid for the wallboard work. It was Valdez, your local contractor. As we've investigated, why is this the case? One is, as a public project, you're obligated to prevailing wage, state prevailing wage. There's paperwork that goes along with that, filing of intents and everything. A lot of the smaller contractors that do wood framing or maybe some small commercial work, private side, they're not dealing with prevailing wage and the paperwork that goes along with that and the long tail at the end of the project that has to do with closing out public projects where their retention is held until the state grants approval for the release of that retention. So it suppresses interest on contractors providing us bids in things like these turnkey structures. I was happy that we got another player engaged here in P&L. I was hoping we were going to have 3 and thought we had 3 up until just a couple days before taking bids. But that's what suppresses some of that interest. One is how far away it is from where that contractor's home base is, working on the island, and the prevailing wage hassle. And just kind of another part of that, Joel, you made a comment about, geez, I can build a house for a lot less than this maintenance shop is, but this is again another arena where, as a public project paying prevailing wage, it's not done on piecework, it's not done on a $15 an hour basis. You're paying a prevailing wage, which generally equates to union scale. So it does skew the kind of costs you're used to seeing in building private work.
Thank you. And one final question. Just so I make sure, and I don't know that I should have to ask this question, but I'm going to because I'm starting to learn if I don't ask, I don't get the answer. Is there anything else built into this GMP 13 that is actually a rollover from another bid package that's work that's already been performed or committed to that's not really part of this package, similar to the $850,000
That's
allowance?
what I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
That's why we put it into a column to make sure it's clear.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to second Trevor's comments about getting people to take a look at this job. The people who are capable of doing this job with prevailing wages, Davis Bacon, all the paperwork, bid this project, P&L and Valdez. Their bread and butter is out on the base, most of it. And there aren't a lot of people in our vicinity, particularly in this market, that are going to be able to be competitive or even have an interest in doing this project because we are an outlier community. So the other thing that is so important that I didn't mention earlier, and I think maybe Trevor or somebody mentioned it, Joe, is the season. The bid items, mostly bid item numbers 2 and 3 are moisture sensitive projects. We have a lot of dirt to handle. We have plants that have to go in, plants that can go in. They can't go in July and August They gotta go in late September, October. And we don't want a mud hole out there for another year. You delay this 60 days, and you're gonna have a mud hole. You're gonna be hanging out there where we have some real problems with this site. And you think people are unhappy having this park impacted this summer, wait until we impact it for next summer. The other thing on bid item number 4, under the structures, that's P&L Valdez, there's a 40% spread between P&L and Valdez, P&L being the low, 40% spread on structures. You know, P&L doesn't bid jobs just for sport, and they're a solid company, so is Valdez. There is nothing to be gained for us on that item to putting it out for rebid. Pulling off West Kitchen, the pavilion, the maintenance building, those are items that are up in the air. They will, I'm not sure we're gonna get it any cheaper, but if we get outside funding, some other funding, that may be the answer, the catalyst that makes this work. And it may cost us a little bit more, but it won't cost us as much as delaying this project, I'll guarantee you about that. Take a look at
Councilor
that,
Watson,
40%.
about 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, real quick, so back to one of my first questions when I talked about only doing the mitigation part separate, and it was brought up that you want to prepare for those buildings being there eventually and not go backtrack and do all the landscaping, grass seeding, and then tear it all up. So if we as council say we cannot get the money to do those buildings, the kitchen, West Kitchen, pavilion, maintenance shop, and that's just the way it has to be for now, and we approve maybe everything else, the sewer fund, all of the hardscape landscapings, what are you going to do with those locations until we get the money? I mean, are we going to know that we're going to put a foundation there and put a cement block in? I mean, you know, if we want to prepare right for those 3 buildings, but we can't afford them, and as he mentioned, we don't want to backtrack, what do we do with those locations?
Well, we're gonna be, prepared as if there's another phase coming on. I don't know if that means grass or putting down the slab for a future structure. My guess is likely seed.
Yeah, more seed.
But with utilities run so that we don't have to dig up infrastructure we've just put in.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I said 4 or 5 minutes, and Tara, you were concerned, I think. Can we extend this if we wanted to?
There's no end time.
Oh, okay, I thought it was advertised, okay.
Sorry,
Good.
that's why-
Thanks,
that's why I
well,
made
thank
the
you.
Oh, okay.
Good, so
Oh, yeah,
let's
I see.
keep going.
We can stay here all
How much more can you take? How about other questions or discussion? Councilor Servadius.
So just trying to clarify then, as you've laid this out, and I do appreciate all the effort that's gone into this and trying to synthesize it, Joe. Is this laid out then, you had a slide up there with staff priorities, which probably kind of align with council priorities. This doesn't necessarily, I'm trying to somehow reconcile what we have money for, and I know we've talked about all of the base, sewer, plus I keep calling it the bid alternate, I think you called it, or that's the first term I heard, general fund, including hardscape and splash park. So then in 4, the alternates were the alternate bid packages. I'm trying to figure out what we don't have money for. Is
So
that,
this table, it's useful, but when we're talking in this context, it's probably not the most helpful. It's page 16, slide 31. Thank you. So this is, if I had a recommendation for you, and I do, actually I shouldn't say if I had one, I do have a recommendation for you. We would do, we would award the sewer fund column and the hardscape, landscape, and electrical, which shows on the 11 by 17 in red, and the landscaping that supports that, and the splash park. We would work towards moving money over so that we have the funding for it, and we would lobby the county for economic development funds for those 2 other structures. And we would work really hard to hold the bids for those until we hear back from the county on those grants. That's what that's the only thing I can think of to get us as close as we can to what we've promised to the public.
And what would be left then, I have a level of detail that Councilmember Almberg has, what would be left in package 4? Is that the West Kitchen Pavilion and, or was
So
that?
in package 4, that would be the pavilion, West Kitchen, and the maintenance building.
Okay.
We haven't applied for a grant for the maintenance building. We don't have the funding for the maintenance building.
We pretty much decided not to build the maintenance.
I'm sorry, Hank. I know he's watching too. I feel bad. You know, let me phrase it this way. We'll look at doing it later. Because as the park improvements go, he's going to need some equipment down there.
We're not building at that price.
Other questions, input? So, next council meeting, we're going to be asked to approve pretty much everything we discussed, I would.
That's my goal.
And that will include using nearly was it 600,000 of the surplus?
We need to add in the NSS and the sales tax to make sure we're right on that. That isn't, these numbers don't include the NSS or the sales tax. We want to make sure we include those in what the total is. So when I ask for stability fund, it will include the full picture. And we figured between 600 and 800, I don't know, 600 and 700. I don't know what NSS or sales tax will do to those totals.
Depending on how this works out, I'm sure the number will vary slightly, so I want to talk with Hoffman.
Yeah, so we want to get those final. But what I would like to be allowed to do is bring forward a resolution for the stability fund to whatever number that comes up with, asking council to approve moving that over to general fund. If we do approve GMP 13, then that would be the second thing to approve, that to move stability fund money into general fund to cover that.
So that will build our hardscape for the entire project and a splash park.
Yes, sir.
Yep. And the other obvious items that are the east kitchen. It will not build the west kitchen, and it will not build the pavilion. That's what we have in at the county right now.
Yeah, and we have a way to put that in our contract for the GMP so that it's, I forget the right phrase, but optional, so that should we be awarded the grant funding, we can release the funds to build those two structures. So we don't have to come back for GMP 14 for those two structures.
Okay? So that's all I have. I guess Councilor Eisen?
We have.
I'm sorry. City Council? Yes.
I just wanted to bring up, speaking of the next council meeting, I have a conference to go to next week, and it's about 4 hours away, so I'd prefer not to leave after the council meeting. So I'm gonna request permission to call in to the next council meeting. We do have a policy in place allowing us to do that, but it's worded as prior permission as opposed to like absences where we can do it at the time. So I'm letting you all know. I know we can't take action, but I'm requesting that at the beginning of the next council meeting, somebody make a motion to give me permission to do that so that I can call it and do that remotely.
How about you yourself?
So I can-
we count on?
You know, all of it,
For that motion?
all of it. I'll split it evenly amongst the 6 of you.
I'm glad she brought that up. I was watching, I wasn't here last week for the council meeting. I know during the consent agenda, there was some discussion. Our attorney chimed in and said, hey, if we want to move this to a workshop, it would have to be a special meeting. We'd have to advertise it that action would be taken. I spoke at the last workshop and referenced that there's really only two types of meeting, regular or special. They both can have action taken. Are we progressing as a mindset to allow action to be taken at these meetings? Has any staff comment, thought process been devoted to that? For example, right there, I could have moved to, you know, give,
Prior permission.
you know, Councilmember Heisen permission.
We have not. reserves.
You would prefer that, right?
I would prefer it. We have taken action at workshops. There's only special meetings or regular meetings, regardless of what you call them. So I can move from the dais to make this happen, but I would like to make it so that we have the ability, we do have the ability, unless we advertise that no action will be taken. I guess if we strike that, then the public, we just have to let them know action may be taken on items. And it might,
Can I ask a question on that? I thought that you had to notice what you were gonna take action on when you noticed the meeting. So if we had a meeting that had items that weren't having action on them, the way you guys were doing it, and I'm far from an expert in this, I'm just asking the question. We had to notice it as an action item. Would we have to do that same thing, or would it be okay if any action was taken on anything?
Generally speaking, we notice the items that we take action on, so that the public can be present and comment on them if there are things that the public wants to comment on before action is taken. However, if random housekeeping type things come up, that is something that we can take action on.
will you please clarify, I forget it's Donahue, the gentleman in the Open Public Meetings Act training in Coopville. I believe he was very clear, but we could figure this out pretty quickly at the MRSC. I think they have to be advertised, but I don't think that precludes you. You don't have to advertise whether or not you'll take action. It just has to be listed. If the topic is listed, you can take action. You don't have to say we may or may not. Would you please clarify that for us? Thank you.
And I'm just curious about public input then at a workshop where we're going to take action. I guess my question is, I would think we would want the public to have the opportunity.
That's why we don't, why we advertise as no action will be taken, because these are supposed to be work sessions. And so the intent is to have council working through various topics without having the public commenting.
Councilor
So to
Servatius.
that note, except for a public hearing, the public is allowed to attend, they're not allowed to comment. We traditionally have let them comment, so we need to make that decision. If there was, and if there's something that's really hot and heavy, it will probably come to a council meeting. But there's a lot of times where we could move to have staff prepare or clarify. I think if there was something that was fairly in-depth, of course we'd let the public comment. But just as a reminder, it's a council meeting, the public is allowed to attend, but there's no right to comment, except for a public hearing.
We've certainly given them that option.
Sure.
I think we would want to keep that. But okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Anyone else? So will you write the motion?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Okay, I think with that, we're adjourned. Thank you all. Thanks for your patience.